first of all, I want to thank you for being here. I often say when members of the league come to Washington to see me, I said, what are you doing here? You need to be in Tallahassee. So you are doing that, and you're doing it on a real-time basis at the time that it counts. Now, let me say that thanks to folks like this, who have an emotional attachment to the right to vote.
Yes.
Because it's hard to believe that less than a century ago in America, women did not have the right to vote. And that was the case in the suffragette movement, also in the UK. And you're still at it.
That's right.
We're not done. And what we find today is that you would think that once the 1920 Constitutional Amendment took place, and then once the 1964 Civil Rights Act took place, and then once the 1965 Voting Rights Act took place, that we would have been well on the way to ensuring not only the right to vote, but the right of access, of counting a ballot, and knowing that that ballot was going to count as you intended it. And yet, not only in Florida, but several other states, what have we seen? We've seen sometimes overt, sometimes very subtle efforts at being successful to make it harder to vote. Now, fortunately, because of you all standing tall, you know that we ought to be making it easier to vote instead of harder to vote. And yet, look what in fact has happened over the last several years. We've seen the subtle attempts to make it harder to vote, well, even before getting to vote, harder to register to vote.
Right.
Fortunately, you had the fortitude to say this is unconstitutional, and you took it into the court, and the federal judge agreed with you, but that's after you had lost a year and a half of registrations.
Yes.
So you won, but on that ground, they won. But going forward, you won. But then look at the other southern efforts. Remember the debacle that Florida had in the year 2000?
Some of us.
And it was so shameful for the state of Florida that they decided then to try to make it easier to vote. They started early voting. What used to be the absentee voting became early voting, because remember, under old voting, absentee, you had to actually swear that you were not going to be in the jurisdiction on the day of the election.
That's right.
In order to be able to cast an absentee vote. Mm-hmm. And so we had this period in the middle of the last decade that it was becoming successful. 2 weeks of early voting was being accepted, and it was being held during the weekdays and on the weekends so that you could make it convenient. Because if people had to vote, had to work during the weekdays, they had the convenience of being able to vote on the weekends. And then you saw what happened. Because two particular minority groups happened to want to vote on Sundays, namely African Americans and Hispanics. we ended up with the legislature and the government of the state of Florida cutting back on that and eliminating that voting on the Sunday prior. And then you saw the experiences that we went through. Not only that, but trying to make it harder for young people. Because a young person would go off to college, very likely they got interested in politics that fall. They would register in the county where they were going to college. And yet, if they showed up on election day with their identification card, which likely was their driver's license, it likely had the home that they grew up in, which was a different county. And they were going to make it harder even for young people. I remember, even after we had gone through the debacle in the 12 election, that in a city municipal election in Gainesville, they were not going to put a voting place on the University of Florida campus. Now that might have been one thing for the turnout, which was expected to be low, but if that was a precursor to what they were getting ready for in the general election in November, then it was another thing. And so too, you've been through all of these wars. So I'm here to thank you, and that's why I'm looking at you instead of them.